Welcome everybody to another live stream for JSTAN Studio. Thank you for joining me here. I hope that the video feed is working properly. It looks like it might have frozen on my side, so we've got a little bit of technical glitches right out of the gate, which is always great. But I appreciate you sticking with me here and for joining me here on this live stream edition of Tuesday Night Paint. I'll see if I can fix this quick video glitch here really quick. In the meantime, we get to take a look at that awesome, awesome still shot that I have there. Pardon me for a moment. Looks like software that I was using for my webcam just cut out on me. There we go. All right. So hopefully we won't have any more problems like that. It's always good when you stumble right out of the gate, right? All right, so thank you again for joining me here. So what we're going to be doing today is a landscape piece. This is going to be from a commission that I have. So what this customer is looking for is just kind of a long landscape painting. So before you ask, what are you doing here with this sort of like weird 3-canvas setup? What's actually happening is for this customer, they have a fireplace in their living room. And above the fireplace, there's sort of this strange extra space that the previous owner just put wallpaper over it. And they were thinking, wouldn't it be cool if we could put a little painting in there instead of this strange wallpaper that doesn't necessarily go with the rest of the room? So that was their thought process behind that. So what we'll be doing is creating a really long, narrow painting to go along that. And what I thought would be good is to do like a sort of like a lakefront scene. So what we would have here is sort of like some mountains in the background, a forest maybe on the foreground, or midground rather. There'd be a shoreline, some water, and then maybe we would see like the tops of the tree line from the coast that we would be sitting on as the viewer for this piece. So that's what we're going to be doing there. As I get started here, I'm going to squeeze out some of my paints over here. I have the 2 camera setup going. So you've got the near cam right here that'll be able to kind of focus in on some of the more specific things that I'm doing, as well as the full cam. You'll notice that this is a different setup from my previous live streams. So there's a little bit of a shakeup in the studio here. So what we have is on this wall here, that's the same color as was on the walls before. And then on this wall, we've got the new color, which is sort of a light bluish gray color. I wanted to do that so that I could lighten up the room quite a bit. So I actually used to work from home. Actually, that's another story that I'll talk about a little bit later. I used to work from home in this, and this was kind of like my home office sort of setup in here. And that worked, fine and dandy. But with these walls that were kind of this dark purplish red color, I don't know if it really comes across adequately on the screen for you, but it is really quite dark. And because this room is partially underground, it's a partial basement floor, and the window that brings in the natural light for this room is underneath our deck, about halfway. There's really not a whole lot of natural light that gets down here, and the natural light that does is kind of obscured. So when you have these super dark walls, it really sort of feels like a cave a little bit sometimes. So I tried to kind of alleviate that by going with a lighter color on some of the walls. I still do like that dark reddish purple color. I think that it looks nice in some respects, but especially as I was down here working for 8 hours a day, that could get pretty grating on you, especially when it came to the time for like winter, when you had a lot of hours of darkness each day. So again, thank you for bearing with me. There's a couple of technical hurdles that popped up right before the live stream started, so I apologize for that. But let's get started here. So what I'm going to be doing is, like I said, laying in a sky up top. There's going to be some water and coastline in the midground here. So I'm going to be using some light blue for that, just to kind of fill in those areas. So I've got some light blue, got some titanium white. I'll mix those together. And something that I'm thinking about here is the room that this commission is going to be going into. So this room is, it's got gray walls. Most of the colors in there are relatively neutral. And this is also, as I said, right above their fireplace. So I don't want to go for something that's going to have a lot of very bright colors, because in my mind, when I look at the room that this is going into, this is not going to be the centerpiece of the room necessarily. I don't want to have, you know, blazing oranges or, you know, really super high contrast colors that just, you know, really draw focus to it, because in my opinion, that's not the intention of the room. And this piece is not supposed to be something that would necessarily draw tons and tons of attention to itself in this room. So what I'm going to be doing is using quite a few like gray colors, brown colors, sort of earthy tones. And my objective with those, with using those, is to kind of dull out a lot of the colors so that they're not quite so in your face, and they don't quite draw so much attention to themselves as you're looking at this piece in the room. I think that that's a little bit more appropriate, both for what the customer would like, as well as for what would look good in that room. I just think that, especially with a piece that's going underneath something like the fireplace that might end up being kind of in the focal point of the room, but not necessarily supposed to be a focal point of the room, I think that it's good to kind of dull out a lot of those colors. So just kind of laying in a sky here. This is always the, it's a fun part to do as the painter, but it's also something where you're not quite sure what to say while you're live streaming while you do it. So I guess in the meantime, I mentioned that I used to work from home in this room. That's something that was kind of a new development, actually, and kind of caught me by surprise. Last week, I found out that the company that I used to work for had laid me off. So it was part of a big sort of corporate layoff. There was a venture capital firm that had come in earlier. It was a little bit before Christmas, actually, that they came in and took over. But so they came in, they said that they weren't going to be making any real changes, but in the end, it ended up that they did. And I was one of, I think, 8 people that was let go as a part of a 50 or 55 person company. It was kind of a big shakeup. So that was a little upsetting, but that's where we are. So I'm in the process of looking for new positions, new opportunities and everything. And one thing that I would like to do with that opportunity that I have, you know, a lot of times I couldn't live stream or make videos as often as I wanted to. So I'm really looking forward to being able to do more of this kind of stuff with you, even if it's not necessarily a live stream, to be able to just make videos and put them out there of paintings that I'm doing, projects that I'm working on. Like I said, this was a commission. So I've got this commission that I'll be working on. And then I also have another commission where I'll be doing some Warhammer 40K Space Marines. So I'll be doing a painting of those. It's the first time that I've ever done a painting quite like that. So I'm really looking forward to that. I was a 40K player back in the day, and then things became a little bit too expensive for me. But I still enjoy painting the models and everything. And that was really how I got into painting, actually, was painting little models of, you know, Space Marine soldiers and the aliens that they battled and everything. I used to love that stuff, and I still really do enjoy the hobbying aspects of it, at least. So I kind of got the sky laid in here. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go down here and put in some of the water. So the way that I'll do that is just with the same colors as are in the sky. I'll start from the bottom and go to the top now, whereas if you notice from the sky, I went from the top and went down. And the reason that I'm doing that is because it's just creating a natural sort of gradient. It's darker at the top, and as you go down, it gets lighter, because as you go towards the horizon, you're kind of looking further away from you through more air, so things kind of look a little bit hazier and a little bit less defined. This is going to be a 4-panel piece. So the reason that I'm working with this kind of odd size of canvas is because the space is, I believe, 12, these are 12 by 16 canvases. And if you lay 4 of these end to end, you're going to get exactly the space that's needed. So that was kind of cool. It's almost like they made it directly for this size of canvas. So just be brushing in a little bit of paint over here. And in order to really capture the effect and the appearance of water, normally what I do is I leave a spot in the water where we kind of have like a little trough of white in here. And what that's signifying is sort of where the light is reflecting off of this surface from the sun or from the moon, if it were a night scene, I suppose. But I'm picturing this being during the day, so I'll kind of leave that trough in here, maybe over here. I think that mostly what I'm going to try to do in terms of composition is sort of balance this out. It'll be sort of balanced one side from the other. There's not really going to be a clear focal point again, like I'm trying to kind of not make this a focal point piece for the room. But I think that that'll give it a nice element of interest so that everything isn't all, one side or another, that everything feels relatively balanced and, without any real feeling of moving to one direction or the other. I think that that'll look pretty nice for what this piece is intended to be. Looks like I might have forgotten to put one piece down. You might be wondering how I managed to set up this piece. I think I forgot a piece back there, but I'm actually using pieces of kneaded eraser to hold these canvases to this little backer board that I have up there. And what a kneaded eraser is if you're familiar with art, you might have heard of one or used one before. I've actually got a little bit of one over here. It's basically like a gummy eraser. And what it does is it allows you to do kind of like a soft erase effect. So if you've got like pencil lines on your drawing or something like that, and you go over it with ink, a lot of times that's done in comic books. They'll pencil in figures to get things right so that it's not locked in stone, and then they'll go over it in ink. A lot of times what a kneaded eraser is you can just rub it over the top, and it very softly erases out those pencil lines and pulls it up so that you can bring forward what you want to bring forward and sort of dial back what you want to dial back in terms of the pencil lines. So I just pulled off pieces of this and stuck it to the back there. They kind of act like glue tack, and I just had this laying around. It's a common artist's piece. So that was a tip that I picked up from a video from an artist named Scott Cirkland. He was talking about tips and tricks about inking specifically, but the way that he used that was he took his little inkwell piece, which he was just using a bottle cap, just totally fine with me. I'm all for reusing things in novel ways. But he was using that bottle cap as his inkwell, and he would take a little piece of the kneaded eraser, stick it to the bottom of the bottle cap, stick it to the table, and that way his ink wouldn't go flying if he inadvertently knocked into it or something like that, because ink is not a fun thing to clean up. It's a fun thing to use as an art material. I'm getting more and more into it, and if you follow the Facebook page and the Instagram page, you'll probably notice more and more ink-type drawings, ink artwork coming down the pipe. So I'm just going in and trying to smooth out some of these colors in the water. I mentioned this is a commission piece, so I am open for commissions right now, especially with the layoff happening. I do have quite a bit of time that I would like to devote to improving art or doing more art for you. I mentioned that I'd be doing more and more live streams and attempting to do more and more of that as well. But if you are interested in a commission or know somebody that would be interested in a commission, you'll notice in the bottom corner of the screen, I have that little support me on Coffee. That's my webpage where I can accept. Well, first of all, there's a shop there where you could buy a couple of things, paintings that have already been done. There's a comic book up there that I did, and that was my first published piece in an anthology. So you can feel free to purchase those. There's a little digital tip jar in there. And if you'd like a commission, there's a spot for commissions as well. So you can feel free to get in contact with me, tell me what you'd like, and we could see if we could make you some artwork. So I do appreciate everybody's support. That is nice, especially in this time where I have a little bit of the extra time and would love to make artwork for people, just for fun or for your man cave or for the wall in the living room or what have you. All right, so we've got sky and we've got water in there. What is probably time to do now is throw in a couple of clouds in the background here. I tend to try to work back to front when I'm working on things. So sky, clouds, things like that. And then as we start to pull forward, there's going to be some mountains in the far background here, so I don't intend them to be super well defined, but I think that those will look nice. So I'll go probably mountains, a tree line, this coast, maybe some of the details that are in this water here, and then some of the tree line that we have up in the front as well. So I'm going to wash off this brush really quick, so pardon me for ducking out of the frame. I just rinse out that brush in the water for the time being. I'm using acrylic paints, so it's important that when your brushes are done, to rinse them off immediately, because if you don't, the acrylic dries very, very quickly. And if your brush gets the stuff dried on it, it's pretty much toast at that point. You're probably not really going to be able to bring it back to life. It's probably just good for maybe some dry brushing effects, or if it's a stiff bristle brush, maybe you can like scrub the toilet with it, but it's not really good for brushing, you know, on a canvas or anything at that point, because everything's kind of clumpy. All right, next up, let's use a fan brush to do some of these clouds. So I'm going to grab a little bit more white paint, and I might even try to dab in a little bit of this gray that I have as well. And the reason that I'm doing that again is I don't want this to be stark white, because if it is, I think that that sharp color there, it just kind of draws the eye and looks a little bit unnatural. And again, I'm trying to kind of have this be an accent piece for this customer, and I think that that's what they'd like ultimately. It's just something that sort of rides in the background, looks nice, fills out the room, but isn't necessarily a focal point just because of where it's going. Yeah. So throw in a couple of quick cloud shapes here. Now with this, I'm going to go in and soften some of the edges just by kind of dabbing over them very, very gently, and then with the fan brush, just kind of lifting up in a couple of spots. Being pretty loose here, because clouds are pretty loose and they flow. And you kind of want to capture that. I find the easiest way to do that is to kind of mimic that sort of feeling of flow and motion with your hand as you're going across, and to blur the edges so they kind of get lost as well. I don't really want sharp clouds. That's not really an ideal thing, nor does it really exist in the world. So it's going to look a little weird if you try to do that. I apologize if my audio is a little bit off. That was something that I alluded to with the technical issues before the stream began. So no fun plugging everything in and all of a sudden the microphone just decides it's not going to be found. So kind of had to work with what you got, so improvise and overcome, as it were. Just going to go to the far side here, see if I can duck out of the way of this so that you can actually see what I'm doing. With clouds, I feel pretty free to just sort of move around. I think part of what makes painting difficult or unpleasant for people, I think, is that they try to control things a little bit too much. I think that that's something that is a reason why I was able to improve in landscape painting the way that I did, and something that I think is a contributor to frustration for a lot of people. I think that when people try to paint like a tree, for example, they sit there and they try to paint every single leaf one at a time, and they try to nick in every little branch and everything, and it's just very cramped. And when you're, especially landscapes, you're painting a lot of organic type shapes, and those don't come with hard edges or corners or really straight lines or super well controlled and well defined. A lot of it is just free, random sort of shapes that that you see in nature, but that are organic and don't really follow necessarily construction like you would if you were an architect or something like that. So I think that keeping that in mind, that everything, you don't need to necessarily paint every single leaf or every single stick of bark or something like that on the tree. Especially when you're painting clouds, it's good to sort of have an attitude of being free and letting things kind of wander and doodle a little bit. So I'm just going through and adding in a couple of details as these clouds move around. I'm going pretty much pure white at this point, and the reason that I'm doing that now is because the base coat of gray is on there and it's a little bit thicker. I'm trying to avoid using too much white paint and allow that gray to kind of come through. So that's the thought process behind what I'm doing right now. As we move further over to the right, I'll move out of your way so that you can see. And I do try to keep an eye on the chat. So if you guys do have questions or you just want to say, hey, you know, what do you think about the latest Star Wars movie or something? Oh, May the 4th. Happy May the 4th be with you guys. It's totally something that I meant to mention at the beginning, but I was a little bit flustered. So, but yeah, if you'd like to ask me about my opinions about Star Wars or something like that, feel free. I'm always game for that. Going for a little bit more detail on this one, and then we've just got one cloud left, and we can start to get into our mighty mountains. More cloud, a little bit more detail. I'm going to start to shift where these patterns of highlight on the clouds are going to be coming from. So over here, I've had them a lot on the right side of the clouds. As we move over to this side, I'm going to start shifting the highlights to being over on the left side of the clouds. And that's going along with this location of the strip of light where the sun would be as well. So I'm kind of envisioning that the sun is probably somewhere over here shining down on this strip of water here. And what's going to happen is all of these guys are going to be illuminated from this side because the sun is here. And as you go further this way, all of these guys are going to be illuminated on this side since the sun is right here. So that's a little bit of the thought process and sort of keeping a consistent source of light across everything. That kind of helps to just unify the painting a little bit and gives it more of a feeling of realism, realistic look. Because even if people aren't necessarily thinking about light sources and stuff when they're viewing your paintings, because most people aren't, not most normal people at least, but it's something that the human mind and the human subconscious naturally sort of recognizes. They might not be able to say what's wrong or what feels off, but they'll be able to definitely tell that something does in fact feel off. And it's not normally what you want when somebody's looking at your painting. All right, so right now I'm pretty happy with where these clouds are. I think that these look great. So now what we're going to do is move a layer ahead. We're going to start working on the mountains, and then they'll kind of fall in line along here. And then in front of those, we'll have our sort of autumn forest. So we'll see a lot of reds and oranges and greens and yellows and so forth in that. And then we'll have the coastline and then the tree line in front. So that's where we're headed. I was thinking about, you might be questioning at this point, hey, you know, you said that you were going to be using more muted colors, less bright colors. Why would you pick an autumn scene? Well, as I was thinking about it, this room is, it has a lot of neutral colors in it to begin with. So I don't want things to be too neutral because I still want the painting to provide something for the room. You know, I don't want it to just be something that sort of sits there and is like, okay, all right, great. You know, I want it to give the room a little bit of color to kind of speak for itself a little bit. But what I'll be doing with those colors, those reds and oranges and yellows, I'm actually going to be mixing them with some browns and some grays, some neutrals and natural colors so that they're a little bit duller. So they still definitely will be orange and red and yellow and gold and all the other colors of the Technicolor Dreamcoat, but they'll be more muted and they'll fit a little bit better with the other neutrals in the room, but they'll still stand out as colors. So that's where my thought process is going. All right, so with my palette knife, I'm going to go into this black color that I have, and I'll take a little bit of brown as well, actually, with me and kind of mix those together. I don't tend to use just pure black when I paint. And the reason for that is because I think when you use just pure black, it comes across on the actual painting as being a little bit unnatural. It just looks a little off. And again, it's something that if somebody is looking at it, they probably won't be able to put their finger on it necessarily. They might not even notice or say anything. But I still think that people notice and it registers that something might be a little bit off with things. So with my palette knife here, I'm just kind of going in and making some rough mountain shapes for the mountaintop. I have plenty of paint on the canvas right now to actually complete these mountains, so I'm kind of trying to stretch things out a little bit so that things don't become super duper wet with paint. Because a lot of times less paint is honestly more. If you can get away, or not get away with, but use less paint, a lot of times a lot of the problems that you see become more trivial. Sometimes when you have too much paint, it becomes so difficult to work with that it just presents more problems than it's worth. All right, and now I'm going to blend these. So the reason that I'm going to do that is while the paint is wet, I can still move it around and get it to be the shape that I want it to be, kind of shape it out as I would like. So I'm going to do that now. And the way that I'm going to do this is as I go down again, I'm going to be getting more and more transparent with the paint. And the reason that I'm doing that again is as you go towards the horizon line, things become a little bit less distinct. You're looking through more air, so you're seeing a little bit more what's called atmospheric perspective. So things are going to become a little bit whiter and a little bit more blue towards the bottom. That's just in general one of the good art principles to kind of keep in mind, and it's especially important when making landscapes like this. So I'm just kind of pulling this down now, shaping this line to be sort of the way that I'd like it to be. And as you pull down, you're going to notice that the paint naturally sort of thins out and becomes a little bit more transparent because you can see through to the white of the canvas a little bit more closely, a little bit more easily, rather. So I'll just pull all of this down. And at this stage, the brush strokes really don't matter in this guy because there's going to be layer on layer that are added over the top of this. So I'm not overly concerned about going side to side or vertically or following anything, any particular shapes necessarily. And there's going to be quite a few trees that are covering the base of this anyway. So what I'll do now is I'll go back to my palette knife and I'll make some more of those shapes on the other side. Mixing some brown with the black, just to make sure that it's not solid black, looking all weird and strange. For each of these, because I'm doing 4 canvases here, I'm going to be putting one after the other so that I can make sure that my my horizon lines line up and that in general the color is consistent across the panels. That's the one challenge of doing something like this, is that as you go, you might be using different batches of paint each time. And just like when you're painting a room, each time you go back to the hardware store, or the paint pots in this case, as it were, you might get a slightly different look to the paint. So I think that it's important to, when you're doing something like this, to keep them close to one another so that you can see what exactly is happening and what the differences are in what you're doing. Just to make sure that the colors don't change too drastically on you from one panel to another. Otherwise you'll end up with some sort of like, I don't know, if you're mixing Legos and Mega Blocks or something like that, just never works out for you. It looks all strange and weird. Maybe it's a weird analogy, but that's enough paint, and I'll shape with the brush again. Dry off the bristles a little bit. And then go back in here and paint away. So again, at this point, we're going more for rough shapes of the mountains than we are for anything that's specific. Just basically want to get something that looks convincing as maybe a mountain range that's far away in the distance. If you're just joining in recently, thanks a lot for joining. Doing sort of an autumn landscape with some mountains in the background. And in the midground, we'll have a little lake that we're looking across, so kind of like a coastal, mountainous autumn city scene. I won't be including any buildings in this, but I don't know, I kind of view it as almost like the view from like a forest marina or something like that. And then you're looking across the bay at the mountains. I'm just going to go across here and clean up some of these lines just so that they aren't quite so feathery. In some spots, there's some sort of feathery lines here, which you don't want really in a mountain range because mountains don't grow like that. Just tweak that. Put in a little nook here to make that look proper. Another little nook. Clean up some of these spots just so that they look good and proper. Maybe a little bit more black to cover up the white that's underneath that. And we are good. All right. So that's going to take a little while to dry for us. So what I'm going to be doing there is I'll be painting with a mixture of brown and white on these mountains to kind of make it look like it's maybe snow-covered or something like that. But that's going to be the main body of the mountain. I'll put in a little bit of blue and white to go on the other side to be kind of our highlights. So that'll be good. And those are going to follow the same pattern as the clouds, actually, in terms of where the sunlight is coming from and where the highlights are going to go. So highlights are going to be on the right side, and then as we move across, they'll shift over and be on the left sides of the mountains. And I think the highlights are really where you define the shape of the mountains and really give them the feel for what they actually look like. So we'll go on the right-hand side. I tend to start with the highlights when I'm doing mountains. So I'll go a little bit of blue into white. And I'll probably want a little touch of brown, just a tiny little touch of brown to unify the piece. And like I said, dull out some of those colors so that they aren't quite so vivid and bright. I'm just going to go in with this little filbert brush. And I'm just going to kind of let it dance where I'd like my snowy sides of the mountains to be. So I'll fill in this. I'm going to flip my brush now that it's starting to pick up some of the dark paint on there. And you notice that I kind of inserted another peak here with this extra little bit of highlight. That's something that you can certainly do, and it's something that gives your mountain ranges a little bit more of a unique and natural feel. So when you just sort of see this peak that sort of comes out of nowhere, it does sort of suggest what's going on with this mountain range, what kind of shapes these rocks have to them. So we'll go down this mountain as well. And I'll pick up another little batch of lighter colored paint. This one's nice and bright. Do another little piece here. And these mountains aren't going to be super detailed because I'm imagining that these are very far in the background. That they're, you know, it's a mountain range, but it's far, far away from the viewer in this painting. And we're going to, in order to kind of sell that illusion, we'll have to kind of dull these out. So my low lights, as it were, the shadows, are going to have to be relatively light as well. Not light enough that they kill the light side that I'm putting on them, but light enough that it pushes the entire mountain range back into the painting. Usually by making things lighter or less distinct. That's normally how you accomplish that sort of a look. So come in here. Maybe this whole thing is in the white. This is part of the fun stuff of landscape painting. People often ask, do you have the scene in mind before you begin? Yes and no. I mean, I kind of, in general, knew what this was going to look like. I knew that I wanted to have a mountain range in the far back. I knew that I wanted autumn trees in sort of the foreground and maybe in the midground as well. But did I, have this particular scene envisioned? No. Am I painting off of a picture or reference image? No. To me, that's part of the most fun stuff of landscape painting. On the Facebook page or the Instagram page, wherever it is that you find my stuff, you might have seen that I did a self-portrait recently. That was the first time that I had ever done a portrait of anybody, really, in paint at least. I've done, obviously, some comic book work, so done things sort of in that perspective, or style, rather. But I've never really done an actual portrait where I was trying to capture a likeness quite like that. And it's fun. I got sort of my roots when it came to painting on canvas and painting landscapes, so it's certainly different from what I've done in the past. And it definitely stretched my artistic abilities quite a bit, which was good. That was totally the intention. But I come back to landscapes and I just love it because of how free it is. It's just so, there's no real right or wrong answers in things. Well, that's not fair. There are wrong answers in things, but it's very just free, and you don't need to worry too much about what you're doing. It's not like, when you're trying to capture a likeness, you need to get the proportions right between the eyes, and from the eye to the nose, and from the nose to the mouth, and you're really trying to capture a lot of the details that make a person look like that particular person and nobody else. I feel like with landscapes, I'm not painting this off of a real place. I mean, this could be anywhere. I mean, as far as I know, it is nowhere. It's just out of my imagination. I think that that's a very fun place to be in terms of where you're painting, where you're creating art too. All right, so over here, I've shifted now, and I'm moving my shadows to be over on the left side of the mountains. So there's a little bit of a shift sort of in this little valley here. And that's what's happening there. So from here on, I'm pretty sure that this is going to be the leftmost painting. From here on, all of the shadows are going to be on the left sides of things, or the highlights, excuse me, are going to be on the left sides of things. Just a helpful tidbit to remember. All right, so now I've gone into the brown. I'm going to take a little bit of the light blue. I'm going to go through this again, and I'm going to capture these shadow areas. I'm going to do that with a combination, mostly blue, but brown as well. Maybe a touch of black just to darken it up a little bit. And the reason that I'm doing this is just to give additional definition. And like I said, I think that this helps to push painting back a little bit if it's a little bit lighter than it was. So I'm putting these in the spots that are going contrary to the highlights. I don't want to make these colors so close to the highlight color, though, that the highlights don't stand out. So right now I'm just making a little correction there. All right. A little bit more white on this guy. And that's the thing. If I come back and I'm not super pleased with the way the colors have come out, I can always go back change them, move paint around. With acrylic paint, it's a little bit tougher to move paint around because it dries so much faster than oil paint does, but it's still possible. One of the things that I like about acrylic paint is actually how quickly it dries. Because at that point, my objective isn't to necessarily blend and get the right color through blending. It can be to build up layers of color, kind of go for a layered approach to how I'm approaching my colors and the effects that I'm trying to achieve with them. Just going through and doing these shadow areas very quickly over here. With going with where the paint is going to, because as I'm working further to the right, the paint has had less and less time to dry. So as I'm moving across, this is actually wetter and wetter as I'm going, which is producing some interesting effects. I'm all for letting art sort of happen to a certain degree too. I like the look of having the randomness. Having super tightly controlled things it's not really my style, and it's not really the style that I like, I guess. So with that, we've got our shadow colors in on the mountains. I come in here and just put in a little bit more color at the bottom, since I have it in my brush, just to kind of dull this area a little bit and bring it together. From here, what we're going to do is start to put in our tree line over here. So what I'm kind of thinking is to give the illusion of depth, to do two sort of, not separate, but distinct tree lines. So we'll have one that's a little bit lighter in color, that's further towards the back. These will have very little color in them. There'll be little touches of red and yellow and orange and stuff, but it'll be very far away. It'll be very desaturated, so very light in color. And then as we get a little bit closer, there'll be a second sort of tree line that'll be much more well-defined, much more bright in terms of color. And then we'll get the tree line that kind of rides in the front here. That'll be very well-defined and very bright. Still trying to keep the colors a little bit desaturated, a little bit earthy, so that they're not quite so, like I said before at the very beginning, not quite super bright or distinct. I see that we're at 7:45. We've been going for about 45 minutes here, so I do want to be respectful of people's time. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to go into white, a little bit of brown, kind of make a gray, a light gray color. I've got a round brush here, and what I'm going to do is below this, I'm going to dab in some sort of just tree shapes. And the easel is going to bounce around a little bit while I do this, so sorry about that, folks. But this is just going to be my, my light gray base coat that I'm going to use for these little tree shapes in the back. Ooh. Quite a bit brighter than it was before, which is actually kind of what I want. So much the better. Happy little accident. Yeah. And I mean, this is just a round brush that I'm just sort of dabbing repeatedly, trying to get different shapes, rotating the bristles a little bit. And I really want to get different shapes, different feels of tree shapes, basically. So every tree is going to be unique. And when you're looking at a forest, you're not seeing every individual leaf. You're kind of seeing an amalgamation of what your brain registers as a bunch of trees. So because this is so far away too, there's not going to be a whole lot of detail or anything here. It's just going to be some blobs that kind of look like trees vaguely. And as I go across, I'll refill my brush with some of the lighter color gray. As I go across, my brush is picking up some of the darker color that was on the canvas from before. So I need to constantly go back and grab some of the original gray color that I was using so that it doesn't get too dark on me as I go across. And on some of these, I'm going up a little bit higher, and some I'm leaving a little gap. But just making sure that I try to leave feathered edges so that they aren't really super well-defined shapes that we're going after here. So that's kind of the thought process there. And the method. So I'm going to wait for this to dry now. I'm kind of going to clean up the bottom edge a little bit. And as I said before, there's going to be another layer of trees that goes in front of that even. It's going to be a little bit closer to us and in the coastline. As long as I'm here though, and I've got the round brush, what I'm going to go ahead and do is fill in this tree line in the very front. So the way that I'm going to do that, because the trees that are closer to you, and pretty much anything closer to you, is going to be more distinct, it's going to be more colorful, I'm going to actually fill that in with blacks and browns. In general, when I work, and this actually goes back to Warhammer 40,000, when I was working with models, I would always work from dark to light. It was just what I always did. And on a 3D model, that works because you start off with the darkest color, and as you build up, you're working further and further out. So if you imagine like you're painting some big, like, I don't know, like a big muscular orc figurine, you start off with the darkest color, and then you go lighter and lighter as you go. Well, the darkest points, or the most recessed points inside of his muscles are going to stay dark because you're not going to be able to hit the inside of those creases, the inside of those muscles as well. So you're naturally going to get darker areas where there should be shadows anyway on a 3D model when you're painting it. And as you move out further and further and you get to more exposed points, you're naturally going to hit that with more paint and it's going to be brighter. So if I can pull up an example here. In this new spot where I am in the studio, here's a little orc that I painted a long time ago. But if we look at kind of like the musculature on his arm, let's see how well that autofocus can capture that. Not well. Okay. See how well we can get it on this guy. Not well. Okay, perfect. So believe me when I tell you that inside of these little musculature pieces, the bulging pieces that come out are naturally hit by the bristles as you're going across much more easily than, say, the inside of the crease of his bicep. So when you start dark, you have that black color all over the place. It's in the creases, it's in the highlighted portions, it's, you know, on his eyeballs and whatever. When you move out and you start painting the top pieces, those pieces that stick out naturally become lighter, and it leaves those pieces inside the creases to be darker. So on a 3D model, that works perfectly. Why did I apply that to canvas painting? I don't exactly know, honestly, but it worked for me. And it's something that I've found that it's just a technique that I particularly enjoy using. A lot of other people might look at me and go, you know, gee, Stan, you're crazy. This is ridiculous. I can't work like this. And that's fine. I mean, you know, I'm a firm believer in doing what works for you, because no two hands are alike, no two brushes are alike. I think that it pays dividends to really just sort of experiment. And I encourage everybody to pick up a brush, pick up a palette. I paint with a lot of very inexpensive paints that you would pick up at, you know, the craft department of Walmart or Michael's or Hobby Lobby. And I tend to go to Hobby Lobby personally, but I don't necessarily think that art needs to be expensive. And some of the greatest joys that I've had in art have been experimenting with, you know, sort of this and that technique, taking some scratch paper and finding, you know, okay, well, what works? You know, I'm not necessarily concerned with, you know, imitating the Baroque style or something like that. I'm just kind of in here having fun. And I hope that having fun comes across for you guys, either in these live streams or in the stuff that you see me post on Instagram or Facebook or anything like that on the website. Because it is a lot of fun for me, and like I said, I really hope that comes across. I was in line at one point. This was a couple of years ago, actually, and painting was something that I was really getting into. I was standing in line. Oh, I was also learning piano at the time, just teaching myself piano with some YouTube videos that I could find on that, which is very hard. I don't necessarily know if that's the best way to learn. Maybe some people can do it, but that was not the way to learn for me. But I was sitting there, painting, playing piano and everything, and two older gentlemen were in line checking out the cash register before me, and they happened to know each other apparently, and they happened to be talking about what each one of them was doing, and one of them was like, hey, Phil, or whatever his name was, what sort of stuff are you doing in retirement? Are you enjoying it? And he goes, yeah, I'm finally learning how to paint and play piano. I really love it a lot. And I was just sitting there smiling to myself, thinking, at that point I was probably like 25, and I'm doing the same stuff that this guy who's done his things in retirement is doing. I think it's important to find the stuff that you love, and I don't know. I've been able to do a lot of different things and find things that I really enjoy, just because I don't necessarily subscribe to the fact that I need to have an $85,000 set of paint and the best brushes and, a French easel or, whatever, in order to do it. I just sort of hop right in. And that method it's worked pretty well for me so far. So I hope that you enjoy sort of the process of experimentation that I have, and that you find it encouraging and inspiring as well. So right there, we just laid in, it doesn't look like much at this point, but these are going to be some of our basic tree shapes that form sort of this, what's going to essentially bookend the piece, kind of give it a good feel to be kind of enclosed and finished. So if it were just water all the way to the end, it would kind of look like you were just going to run straight out of the painting and drip all over the place. But I think that giving it sort of a bookend really gives it a nice feel of completeness and stability that it would otherwise be lacking in a certain sense. So we're just going to lay those in really quick. And I think we're going to be out of time here at this point. But in the next run around, I don't know if I'll be doing a live stream or if I'll just be doing a video. I might be doing some time-lapse videos where I just do a voiceover and kind of talk about what kind of methods and everything that I'm using and what my thought process was at different types or different points in the painting. So if you'd like those, feel free to leave a comment on that and tell me, yeah, I'd like that, or no, I prefer the live stream stuff, and we'll see what we can do. But in the next go around, we'll be putting the color in these trees. We'll put in the second tree line and the coastline that'll go across. And we'll be putting some of the color in these foreground pieces that'll really kind of be bright and I think really draw and pull the piece together, giving it a nice complete feel. So with that, I'll just give another plug for the coffee shop. So if you'd like to support me there, you can feel free. It's that link that's down over in the corner. It's over there. Just to support me, you can buy one of the other pieces that I've completed in the past if you'd like those. There's a comic book that I did, the one that was published earlier this year, which I was really excited about. You can get the downloadable PDF there. You can request a commission just like this one. You can tell me what you'd like, if you'd like some, space marines fighting on the surface of the moon, or you want a nice serene landscape or something like that, or Conan the Barbarian or something. Just feel free to get in contact with me and we can work out whatever you'd like. So again, thank you for joining me here. If you wouldn't mind, just leave a like, subscribe to the channel, go follow my Facebook and Instagram pages if you haven't already. Those are down in the description. I try to post once a week depending on what the schedule is. And I'm looking forward to posting a little bit more often now that I have some free time. Might not be exactly the way that I would want to have extra free time, but I look forward to doing that. And I hope that you enjoy everything. So thanks for joining the stream. Thanks for sticking around. And see you in the next one. God bless.